Chess coaches and YouTubers have been telling you a chess rule, never to play a certain move, and that rule is wrong. We're going to dive into a game analysis and talk about why the rule is wrong and where there are exceptions to the rule. So in this game, I'm playing the black pieces against a USCF expert, and we have a Caro-Kann. This is called the advanced variation, and I play 3c5. After d takes c5, e6, putting immediate pressure on this pawn. This comes straight out of the ChessGoals Caro-Kann course. It's our best-selling individual course. Now here my opponent plays a3. This is a high-level move. The idea is you let black take the pawn, and then you play b4, and you really try to control these dark squares. So white's going to have pawns here and here, and the pawn on e5. So it takes, he attacks the bishop, I drop back, and now we see bishop to b2. The bishop sits pretty nicely here, defending this advanced pawn on e5. Now I play a5, trying to undermine this b pawn. It has to push, and knight to d7. In this position, because I've worked on the Caro-Kann course, I knew most of the general ideas. You want to put your knight on h6, you want to castle kingside, play pawn to a4, pawn to b6, knight to c5, bishop to b7, etc. So it's a pretty natural development plan for black. And one thing that we do in the Caro-Kann course is we really focus on the ideas and the plans, not just memorizing moves. So I had most of these ideas down. Knight f3, knight h6, knight b to d2, castle. So at this point, you can see the eval bar on the left. We're at a 0.0 eval. That's really pretty good from the black side, 10 moves in against such a strong player. So I'm equal out of the opening, and now I can look to try to fight for an advantage. Now at this point, after bishop to d3, playing a4 is a strong move. And this is sort of a deep idea. The reason you want to play a4 here is you can disjoin these pawns. Don't allow the white pawn on a3 to defend its buddy on b4, on b5, excuse me. So we don't want white to play a4. We want to play a4 ourselves. First I started with knight to c5, and now the strongest move for white is to just play a4. But my opponent did not want to give up the bishop pair. So after knight takes d3, c takes d3, I would have two bishops and white would have one. So that would mean I would have the bishop pair advantage, but it's actually a really good strategic idea for white to just play a4 here. Give me the bishop pair because he has so much space, and with the pawns locked up, my bishops aren't that great. So he retreats, and now there's a super strong move here that I missed, knight to a4. And the idea is this bishop doesn't have any great squares. If it goes back to c1, it leaves the c3 square open for my knight. And a bishop to d4, I play knight to f5, attacking the bishop. So knight a4, super strong move. I play b6. Okay, the chess rule is coming up very soon. So now, after b6, he castles. I lock in a4, knight to d4, bishop to b7, guarding this c6 square. c4, queen to c7. So if you look at my position, every piece besides the rooks has developed out of the 8th rank. So now I'm just ready to get the rooks into the game. And that was kind of my mindset here. I'm also threatening the immediate queen takes e5. So he defends this pawn. And here you can see this eval bar, half pawn advantage for black. At this point, what I needed to realize is I have to break the rule that everyone has been telling you, never play f6, never play f6. I think this has messed with me psychologically. What I need to do here is play exactly that, pawn to f6. And the takeaway here is whenever you see a white pawn on e5 in this sort of Caro-Kann advance or French advance structure, when you have pawns like this and there's a pawn on e5, it's almost always a good idea to develop your pieces and then play f6. If I play f6 here, this is going to be a great position. But I missed it. I missed the idea completely. And you're going to see in a few moves, I start to have difficulties getting developed. Now, if you look at the eval bar here, it is showing a little ounce of an advantage for white, but it's actually because it's just too low of a depth to understand. I looked at this with a higher depth. So I need to play f6 right here. Instead, rook a d8, rook c1, and now here, f6 would be a good move again. And there's also this cool idea, knight to f5. And I'm always kind of afraid to weaken my kingside pawns. If knight takes f5, e takes f5 though, even though these pawns are separated and this pawn on d5 looks very weak, this opens up the bishops. And it's very important in chess to keep your pieces active. This is the way to activate my bishops. And this is an advantage for black. F6 here is also a good move. So I played queen to b8, queen c2, rook c8. And now coming up here after a little bit of shuffling, there's another takeaway that I've learned from my games. I need to be very aware of exchange sacrifices. So this is something that I want you guys to do in your games. Log a takeaway or two after every single game, and then keep a running list of things that you're working on across a batch of games. So 2 things that I'm working on, play f6, and these structures are white as this pawn on e5. Comes out a lot from the Caro-Kann. I'm also working on recognizing exchange sacrifices. This is something that I don't fully appreciate yet, but I'm working on it every single game when an exchange sac even potentially comes up. I'm trying to figure out how to rewire my thinking. So here, I play knight to b3, thinking that I'm just attacking the rook. My opponent ignores it and plays the super strong c takes d5. And after I take back, now he moves the rook. And the problem is, if I were to take his rook here, knight takes c1, he can simply play queen takes back, and his pawns are super strong in the center. So I could have gone for this, but I thought, you know what, let's not go for the material here. I took, moves the rook, bishop c5, and now a massive kingside attack forms. The strongest move would have been queen takes c6, and the idea is white cannot play knight g5 because my bishop guards it. In the game line, my bishop leaves the defense of g5. My opponent goes bishop to d3, poking at this pawn. I take c6, he takes h7, king over, and now knight g5. There's a crazy threat here, bishop to g8, followed by queen to h7 checkmate, defended by the knight. So I play pawn to d4. I'm trying to fight for a little bit of counterplay, trying to activate my pieces. The idea here is this pawn blocks the bishop on b2 from, creating this diagonal all the way towards my king. And also that frees up my queen, who was guarding d5, to potentially swing across and help on the king side. So bishop e4 played, queen d7, bishop to b7. This is a really strong idea. So this bishop, if it moves off of this diagonal, queen h7 mate is threatened. But the problem is if it moves to a square like c6, I can go queen to f5. That was my plan, blocking this diagonal and offering the queen trade. So my opponent says, all right, I'm going for the exchange. And this is not an exchange sacrifice on my part. This was just me trying to bail out and not get checkmated. Queen f5, takes. And one of my takeaways from the Chicago Open, my tournament prior to this one, was to play more endgames and really fight for the endgames. In this case, though, I'm just fighting for my life, but there will be equal endgames that you're going to see coming up in my game reviews, where I show you guys how to fight for wins in endgame positions. So now my opponent plays bishop takes c8. This feels almost lost, because he grabs f7, retreats the knight. Now, I should be losing this position from the black side. But I want you to pause the video and think, how do you fight for chances? What is your best plan at a high level to create some problems for white? Okay, if you said use the passed pawns on the queen side, you were right. So I have a pawn on d4 and a pawn on b6. The pawn on d4 is already a passed pawn. The pawn on b6 is a potential passed pawn, meaning if it pushes off and trades for this pawn on a3, now the a pawn becomes a passed pawn, right? So we have the potential of a passed pawn over here and a passed pawn here. So I play b5. Knight f3 attacking this guy, and I overprotect it. This frees this knight up to swing around and help on the queen side. Rook d3, so he's trying to pile up on this pawn. I'm keeping it well defended, and now b4 is coming soon. He plays g3. This is a mistake, and it's not easy to figure out why. So when you're in endgames, not just endgames that are much worse or losing, you always want to play active and still pose tough questions to your opponent. So this position, I think, is hard to play for white to hold the win because he's so stuck playing defensive, right? All of these pieces are focused on one pawn, but he's not really prepared for my launch of b4 and a3. So now after b4 takes, all of a sudden this rook has no squares. White has to sacrifice the exchange. There's only one good move here, and it's rook to c3. I don't know who's finding that. That's an insane move. But the idea is this pawn is pinned down by the rook on d1. So he sacks the exchange, and now I'm back in the game. Small advantage for white. Bishop a3, rook a8. Bishop takes b4. Now here, can you find the best move for black? Go ahead and pause the video and try to find it. The best move is pawn to b2. I didn't calculate that I could get the queen. I thought that white could simply play knight back to d2. And after bishop takes b4, knight c4, bishop c3. But the problem now is I'm going to play rook to c8, and white's actually in big trouble. And they're probably going to have to sacrifice their knight for this b pawn. So I miscalculated here. There is a crazy line after b2. Bishop takes c5, rook a1, takes, move the king. This has an eval of -1, but because it's an endgame, you know that it pretty much has to be a win for black or a draw. And I played this out super deep. I'll show you guys the setup that I tried, trying to figure out if I could make progress with the king and queen. And I got the king all the way to e2, trying to double attack the knight, but then there was this repetition of moves, no way to make progress. So I think this line with move 40 b2 is actually a fortress for white. It's still a draw. Okay, so in the game I played bishop takes b4, but now I get into this kind of scary position. After d2, there's this forced sequence where he goes knight takes d2, I take, and now there's 3 pawns for the bishop. The 3 pawns are going to be hard to stop in the endgame. So what I do is I force the rook trade, or offer the rook trade. It's kind of hard not to accept it. And then in this position, I knew if my bishop could sacrifice for 2 pawns, and I was able to trade my g pawn for one of white's pawns, I could hold the draw. So that's a lot of things, but the bishop gives you free tempo, right? You can move the bishop back, forth, back, forth. Pawns can only go forward. So I do have that advantage. So we'll go forward a little bit. I'm using the g pawn to slow down the f pawn. As soon as white pushes, I'm going to trade, create this 2 pawns against my king scenario, and then sacrifice my bishop for the 2 pawns, knowing that that rook pawn on its own cannot win. That's the strategy. So he pushes, take. Now I put my king back, and I'm just waiting. I want to see white play f6, and I'm going to snap that pawn off and grab 2 pawns for the bishop. So he maneuvers the king around a little bit. I'm just waiting. And now I find this move, poking at the pawn. He plays check. And this is the only move, king to g6, cutting off the white king from the f5 square. So all of these squares are covered. This pawn is attacked. He goes to defend it, and I play bishop to d8. Now he can't avoid bishop takes, pawn takes, king takes, and that resulting endgame is a draw. So, even though that was a scary endgame, the bishop versus 3 pawns, that was a draw all along. My takeaways from the game, not worrying about having a bad pawn structure, especially if it comes with piece activity, respecting the exchange sacrifice more, and I think I did play well in the endgame to fight back. If you guys enjoyed this game, make sure to leave a comment, let me know, and I will see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.